So although it's pretty far from modern culture, the fact is that in the Old Testament, there was a provision for servants to permanently attach themselves to the house of their master. Most of the slavery, so called, in the Bible was actually what we would call indentured servitude, where people who didn't have enough money to remain alive were able to place themselves under terms of bondage with another person. And so they would serve that person for a set of years. And at the end of that term, during that term, they'd be cared for with their necessary food and clothing and housing. And at the end of that term, they'd be set free with a certain amount of money that was all prescribed by the law. We don't really do that anymore, for better or for worse. But because we don't do that anymore, and because I said for better or for worse, but it's for worse that we don't do that anymore. Because we don't do that anymore, we have an inflated idea of what we call independence today. And so because of the wealth of unmerited prosperity, the consequences of personal choice are often insulated. And that gives us this illusion of thinking, why would anyone willingly place themselves under indentured servitude? And then secondly, all the more, why would anyone voluntarily make that permanent? Well, it turns out that there are many cases where your well-being in service to another person is actually much greater than your well-being as an independent person. And that's true today, and it's been true throughout history. And if we didn't have coercive welfare, as we do today, where governments steal the fruits of the labor of people and redistribute that to those that do not deserve it, we would more readily recognize this. Unfortunately, bad policies, the consequences of bad policies go far beyond the temporal well-being of a nation. And one of the consequences of the way the modern world does welfare is that it harms our ability to understand God in many ways. So just as there are many circumstances where being in the service of a person will lead you to much greater well-being than being on your own, it's always the case that being in service to God will result in much better outcomes. That this is like the understatement of the universe. that service to God will always leave you much better off than anything you could do other than that. You know, we read where Jesus taught, "Who of you can make themselves taller just because they want to be? And if you can't change something so simple, why would you expect that your efforts in seeing to your own well-being could amount to anything better than what God can arrange for you?" Now, obviously, this is a paraphrase. This is where he taught, "Seek ye first the kingdom of God, and everything else will be added unto you." Now, we read that, but it's a far stretch to actually live it. You can read it and feel warm and fuzzy on the inside, but living it can be quite a challenge. At some point in the future, I'll release a book where I talk about, in one chapter, I'll talk about willingly becoming a servant to God, a slave to God, and why that's the best thing that you can do. And I just want to highlight a few ideas from that chapter now, and for those who have sufficient faith, you can begin to obtain the blessings from living these ideas, even if the book's not out yet. So here's the scripture from Luke chapter 17. The Lord says, "But which of you, having a servant plowing or feeding cattle, will say unto him by and by, when he is come from the field, Go and sit down to meat? And will not rather say unto him, Make ready wherewith I may sup, and gird thyself, and serve me till I have eaten and drunken, and afterward thou shalt eat and drink." This is unnecessarily convoluted. In plain English, the Lord's saying, look, if you're a servant, it doesn't matter if you've been working all day long. When you get into the house, the master of the house doesn't say, "Oh, you've been working so hard all day. Why sit down? Why don't I get something for you? You don't have to put your feet up on the table. Just here's a back massage. Why don't you just relax?" Right? The master says, "Where's my dinner?" Because it's the servant's job to be doing the things that the servant's doing out in the fields. And then when the servant comes, it's still his job to prepare everything needful and helpful for his master. That's what it is to be a servant. When we pray to God, if you had to make a pie chart of your prayers, what's the percentage of you asking for things because you want them? You asking for things because you'd like to be more comfortable or in less pain? How often do you ask for things so that you could suffer less? You're looking for relief of suffering, or you pray for the relief of suffering of other people. What percentage of that pie, how big is the slice, where you are seeking the will of God? In other words, what percentage of your life are you using to actually serve God instead of seeking goodies for yourself or other people? Again, seek ye first the kingdom of God. And it's not just that part that we get stuck on. It says, "And all things will be added unto you." And what we do sometimes, too often, is we say, all right, that first part doesn't sound so great, but if I do it, then I'll get all the goodies. And that's why I really like this passage from Luke 17. You say, like, well, if I go and I work in the hot sun all day for the master, then I'll get to come in and I'll get all these nice goodies. And Jesus says, no, you'll serve the master when you come inside too. It's only when all of that is done that you get the goodies. Now, that's not even the completion of peeling away all the layers here. That's where we don't have time to read it, but read the prodigal son. The goodies are serving the master. That's a big old rug pull for most Christians. Oh, I got to whip myself here. I got to flagellate myself. Because if I do this for long enough, then God's going to give me all the goodies that I've always wanted. Maybe, if you want, you can cash out your chips and go eat with the pigs, like the one son did. Because you'll find out that if you disconnect from his purpose, it's not very glamorous. He said that he's the true vine, and without him we are nothing. All good things are found in the vine. It's in the mountain where the Lord provides. You see, the clever people figure this out, and they put their whole soul into serving him. Because that's the best way it can be. Where are you going to find something better? The disciples, at one point Jesus said, hey, I'm just going to go ahead and spill the beans. The whole point of this is so that you can be more like me. And they said, whoa. We're here for the free loaves and the fishes. What's all this business about? We need to be like you. We don't want that. Just give us the goods. And he said, no, that's the deal. And a bunch of people left him. And he turned to the disciples and he said, are you going to leave? And they said, where are we going to go? You have the words of eternal life. Where are we going to find something better? This is it. Not this is it in a bad way, but hey, we're already on track for the best. This is it. We've already figured it out. We don't need to look anywhere else. We just need to hold on for our dear lives, right? But then we have this interesting rotation of this, and this is actually earlier in Luke. This is Luke 12, verse 37. He says, "Blessed are those servants whom the Lord, when he cometh, shall find watching. Verily I say unto you, that he shall gird himself and make them to sit down to meat, and will come forth and serve them." You see how this is a different side of what this imagery of the servant coming in from having worked all day, and the master says, "Make ready wherewith I may sup." Where's my dinner? Let's go. Let's get this show on the road. But then in this one it says that when the master finds the servant working, it says he'll gird himself and make them sit down to meat, and will come forth and serve them. I have had experiences that prove to me that this is true. I've had experiences with the Lord that prove to me that this is true. In John 12:26, the Lord said, "If any man serve me, let him follow me. And where I am, there shall also my servant be. If any man serve me, him will my Father honor." There are experiences that you can have with the Lord that you cannot have unless you serve him with all of your heart, might, mind, and strength. This life is given to us as a gift so that we can give it back. Because as we dedicate it to the purpose of our Master, it opens to us experiences that we can have with him that can't be had in any other way. And again, I point you to the parable of the prodigal son. This life is given to us so that we can choose to use it for his purposes. And as we consummate that by fully sacrificing everything to his purpose as far as we understand it, what we're doing is we're choosing to remain in his house with him, to learn more about how he is. And that is something that gives us joy in the eternities. It increases our joy in the eternities. He said that the thief comes to steal. Satan's goal is to destroy and to diminish. But the purpose of the Lord is for us to have more abundantly. To have what? Everything that comes from and is fulfilled in him. More abundantly than what? Than what we had before. It's in serving him here that we get to know him better. And we get to keep that forever. That increased association is ours forever. That's the mansion in heaven. That's the treasure in heaven. It's one way of thinking about it. So, but you can choose to be the other son and to say, yeah, but what I really want is the goodies. What can I get out of this here and now? And in the prodigal son, the father says to the son that stayed faithful, he says, all that I have is yours. The faithful son had transcended an inheritance. Because while it was true with all the wealth that the father had, and the land and everything, all the cattle became the son's. But what's greater than that? It's to become like the Father. And then you have him forever in you. And you get to be with him forever. There's a man in the scriptures that we don't talk about enough. His name's Mephibosheth. And Mephibosheth was one of the sons of Saul. Well, he was Jonathan's son, but he was of the house of Saul. And it's a long story. I won't tell the whole thing now. But essentially, Mephibosheth, he loved David. And the reason he loved David was because David loved him first. David was thinking about how much he cared about Saul, believe it or not, and especially Jonathan, his son. And of course, they both tragically died. And he said to his servants, go search and see if there's anyone left from the house of Saul. And they said, yeah, there's this guy Mephibosheth. And David said, bring him to me. And Mephibosheth was scared because he thought, he was going to get killed for some residual bad blood with Saul. And David said, no, I want you to eat at my table. And I want to take care of you to do honor to your father's house. And so this went on, and there were, these exiles that David went through. There was back and forth with this. But essentially, Mephibosheth's servant, Mephibosheth was handicapped. His legs didn't work right. And so that was a hard thing back then with all the farming. And so Mephibosheth had a servant who was in charge of all of that. And this guy betrayed him and lied to David about some things that had happened. And it's a really interesting story because as David comes back from exile, he starts going through the list of people who had turned on him. And he gets to Mephibosheth and he calls him in. And he says, how could you have done this after all I did for you? And there's this dispute about who did what, because, like I said, Mephibosheth had been betrayed by his servant. And essentially, all Mephibosheth cares about, and he says this, it's a really beautiful passage, because there's a threat of him losing all of his land and his wealth as punishment for what David isn't quite sure he did. And he says, take it. I don't care. He says, the only thing that matters to me is that you're still alive. And to me, that is such a beautiful encapsulation of how we should feel about the Lord. that when he asks us to put things on the altar, not only are we happy to do that, well, not only are we willing to do that, but we're happy to do it. And we feel honored that he would consider us worthy to do it. And that the only thing that matters to us is that we get to be with him hereafter in his kingdom. And he says here, if any man serve me, let him follow me. And where I am, there shall also my servant be. Here's a verse that I like from an apocryphal book called The Wisdom of Solomon. It's from chapter 3, verse 9. It says, they that put their trust in him shall understand the truth, and such as be faithful in love shall abide with him. For grace and mercy is to his saints, and he hath care for his elect. And so here again we have this message. If you serve Jesus, your well-being ceases to be your problem. That's, again, coming back to seek ye first this kingdom. Seek his kingdom. Seek first his kingdom. If you put the will of God as first priority in your life, in that passage, it talks again and again about why are you so worried about where your food's going to come from? Why are you so worried about where your clothes are going to come from? Look at the birds. They're just birds, and God takes care of them. Look at the flowers. They're just flowers, and yet God takes care of them. And how much more will he take care of his servants, who give everything they have for his purpose? They that put their trust in him, he will care for them. And so it's not that these things cease to be on your to-do list at all. It's that they're on your list only in the context of continuing your mission. And what's your mission? His purpose. Now, we have this promise that those who consume their life on the purpose of God, that when he finds you doing this, he will gird himself, he will make you sit down to meat, he will come forth, and he will serve you. We have this promise that he cares for those who have adopted his purpose. We have this promise that where he is, his servants will also be. We have this promise that if any man serve him, the Father will serve that man. I've read all these to you. Here's another one from Jeremiah 17. Blessed is the man that trusteth in the Lord, and whose hope the Lord is. Which, pause, this is like talking about believing in God. It's abused by most people to mean far less than it does. If you actually trust in God, you will 100% obey his commandments, period. If you don't obey his commandments, whatever you're disobeying is something you don't trust him in. If you actually hope in the Lord, you will invest all of your heart, mind, and strength on his purpose. If you don't do that, you don't actually hope in the Lord, right? Continuing the passage here. For he shall be as a tree planted by the waters, and that spreadeth out her roots by the river, and shall not see when heat cometh, but her leaf shall be green, and shall not be careful in the year of drought, neither shall cease from yielding fruit. Jeremiah 17. There are more promises in the scriptures. In the condition of this law, because these are laws, God's promises, they're laws. You fulfill the cause, you get the effect. These conditions are open to all who will live them. It's your choice. It's a menu and it's handed to you. The last time I went to Utah, a friend of mine who is in the restaurant business, he insisted on feeding me and my two boys that were with me. He handed me a menu and he said, anything you want. And that's what God does for us. The price has been paid for these blessings to flow. There's still a price that we have to pay to receive them. But it's not the same as making them possible. That price is a lot higher. Excuse me. So, in this case, anyone can have anything on the menu. They just have to pick it. And that's the price we pay, is we pick it. And you pick these blessings that Christ has paid for us by choosing how you want to live. If you choose according to his purpose, you receive all these blessings that I've just shared with you. Now, here's a really interesting situation. By the way, you know what I did? I asked him what's the best thing on the menu. I'm sure he had no idea the symbolism of all of this, the lesson in all of this, which I wasn't doing it for a lesson. I was doing it for a delicious lunch. Grateful for it. But I guessed that he probably knew a lot better than me what was the best thing on the menu. Right? So I asked him, well, what's the best thing? And that's what he brought out. Do this with God. Now, he has already extensively shown us what is best, because it's what he did in his life. And if we use that as a model to follow, and we do all we can to try to adapt it to our circumstances. You don't live in Israel 2,000 years ago. You don't wear old-fashioned clothes, etc. But if you do your best to adopt that to whatever circumstances you're in, and you spend time and effort trying to learn what that adaptation is, there isn't anything better. He already solved that puzzle. Now, like I said, there are many more blessings that are like this, that all flow from that same condition, to adopt his purpose as your own. But this interesting circumstance that I wanted to get to, it was in ancient Israel, where Moses was leading the nation out of bondage to the promised land. And there were times along that journey where things got so out of hand that the Lord told Moses that he wanted to destroy them. And one of the counter arguments that Moses raised was, he said, look, You brought them out with a lot of fanfare. Egypt's a big deal. Everybody knew about this with the plagues and everything. What is everyone going to think about you if you destroy this people who you said were your people? You know, I'm obviously liberally paraphrasing here. But he said, in effect, I know they've been wicked. You know they've been wicked. They deserve to be destroyed. But the nations don't understand that. They don't get how this works. They weren't here to see this. So what are they going to think about you? Now, when we try to persuade God, that's in air quotes if you're listening and not watching, it's an exercise of faith. It's not so much that you're really changing his mind as much as you're opening doors. You're changing the tumblers on a lock. He operates through law, and there are laws that you can invoke. Cut to the chase, obviously Israel was not destroyed. Now, what would a modern equivalent of this, not equivalent, but a modern instance of this pattern be? Imagine a person who had been extremely public about his testimony of Christ and about his service to the Lord, and that he ministers for 70 plus hours a week, that he did it for 35 plus hours a week for years and years, while holding down 1 to 2 full-time jobs that were challenging, while having a young family, while having all sorts of responsibilities on a small farm. And let's say that this person had publicly suffered some outrageous injustice and lost his career. And at the same time had gone through, I say lost career. It's me, by the way, okay? We're talking about me. So let me just cut out the third person because it's making it challenging to lay out what I'm trying to say here. Let's say that this person, okay, so for years and years, I worked like a maniac and I deferred compensation. I left my chips on the table in the temporal things that I was invested in. And I just kept reinvesting. My whole life since I first learned about the Lord at 18, my whole adult life, I've sacrificed again and again and again to get to the point that one day I'd have a lot more time to do ministry. That was the goal. And it was a vital part of why I decided to be a professor, why I went back to grad school to do that, why I worked my butt off to get tenure, why I worked my butt off to get promoted early, to get merit-based raises again and again, because the university I was working at was a joke as far as the pay that they offered. I took a 15% pay cut from what I was making before going back to school to get grad degrees in order to become a professor. I worked my way through that and past that. I got extremely difficult to get grants. Ended up starting a business on top of all of that. I spent years of what would have been the beginning of the comfortable time building a business, which is excruciatingly hard to do in a low population area. Building people up, giving them chances, paying them way more than they're worth to just see if it'll pan out, teaching them all sorts of things that they don't know. Building up a team, I think the high water mark was 24 people at the company. And when I was canceled from the university, they walked. I lost, the company was worth about $7 million. I lost millions of dollars in lifetime compensation in the university profession. The university owed me a sabbatical when all that happened, which obviously I never got. I had I think $320,000 in grant money that I hadn't spent. That most of that would have ended up as salary, additional salary. It's like a bonus on top of your base. And then on top of that, I had spent years and years learning to trade stock, and I had again, we were living frugally for a long time, just to retire early and have the time to do ministry. And we had paid off our house. I think I did that around 35 or something. It was 35 or 36 when I had the house paid off. Ended up doing a cash out refinance, investing that money. And at one point I was active trading, I think $2 million in the stock market. So during the cancellation, all this happened in just waves. So canceled from the university job, everyone walked out from the company. I found out that the senior people at the company who had been working for me for years were lying about the work that they were doing. They hadn't solved the problems that they had claimed to have solved. It was just sort of fun and games. Everybody was taking advantage of me. So that was millions of dollars of investment that was wasted in the end, stolen, I would say. And then some trades went terribly bad during that time too. And I lost over $1 million in money, I lost over $1 million, $1.2 million down the drain. So that's just sort of the tip of the iceberg, though, because that's all just physical stuff. I've said before, the reason Job's suffering is written about in the Bible, the reason it happened the way it happened, the boils, the people dying, the loss of his wealth, those are things you can rattle off to people, and they can place that in their experience, their experience in the world. They're like, oh yeah, I think I could imagine what it'd be like to grow up poor, build up to the point where you've got $1.2 million in cash, and to lose all of it. I think I could imagine what that would be like. I think I could imagine what it would be like to have a sweet job as a developer, making good money, decide to risk all of that, give it all up, be poor again for years and years to get a master's and a PhD while you have little kids, while you're remodeling a crack house because it's the most you can afford. And that's the only hope you have of selling it again because you really got yourself into a mess with that. Working your butt off at a third-tier university to get tenure, to get grants in spite of being at a third-tier university, in spite of not having any students that can do quality work, and working against the grain of the knuckleheads that you work with, overcoming all of that, and then having the rug yanked out because of living the gospel. So, but that's just the tip of the iceberg, because the spiritual part of what occurred over years is so much worse than that. And it's not something I've talked about yet. Now, what's the point of all of this? I'm talking about the benefits of choosing to be a servant of God, which all of us can do that. The menu has been handed to you. So you say, well, we're talking about benefits. That doesn't sound very good, right? Oh, but it does. Let me tell you something. The way you think about suffering is wrong. You think of it like cancer. You think it's something that just happens to people, and it's unfortunate, but it's not going to happen to you. Or even worse, you think of it as like an STD, where Yeah, there's some suffering involved in that, and some of them, it doesn't go away. But, you did what you did to get it. Both of these things are wrong. It's coming for you too. And if it doesn't come for you, if you don't experience it as an individual, I promise you, you will experience far worse than those temporal things that I listed off as the end times unfolds. The blessing has been that the Lord has used my life and the events in it to give me tools to overcome these things. Some people look at all that and they sneer. They say, look at this clown. He pretends to know this, that, whatever. Yeah, some God he has. Look at the things that happen to him. He doesn't even have a job. He just begs for money. When the Lord went through his trial with Pilate and with the Sanhedrin, he said, I'm only here because my Father wants me here. And if I asked right now, he would send a legion of angels and take me out of this. You should be very careful when you sneer against people who sacrifice what you're not willing to sacrifice for God. We get to serve him, but he doesn't need us. The opportunities he gives us, they're for us. They're not for him. They're for us. Now, he's very happy to see us happy. He's chosen to denominate his joy in our joy. But he doesn't need us. He doesn't need you. He doesn't need me. But we get to be here. He gives us the opportunity to take part in his glory. The things that I've gone through, they weren't for me. They were for the people who benefit when I share with them the things I learned through them. This is something I'm going to explain a lot more of later. But there's a difference between merited suffering and unmerited suffering. The suffering that the repentant go through is unmerited suffering. It's not something you can do until you've repented of all of your sins. And once you get there, going through it, what it does is it enables through faith, it enables you to help other people beyond what they deserve. You willingly suffer beyond what you deserve in order to help others beyond what they deserve. And this is the key by which Moses did what he did for the Israelites. He suffered quite a bit in his life, and he turned that around to use it to bless them. Anyway, one of the benefits of choosing to be a slave to the Lord is that you come under his care. Your well-being becomes his responsibility. Another blessing is that you are full of trust in the Lord. Your confidence waxes strong in him. You know, as Jesus said, if I pray, he'll send me a legion of angels. You know that he hears you. You know that your situation is his will. And you rise above the ability of any person or any situation to take away your confidence that you have with God. Imagine the peace that that would give you. Again, some people would look at my situation and sneer. How would you be doing in this situation? You know, during the week that I was on administrative leave, not knowing what the heck was going to happen with my job or my career, you know what I did? I spent the week writing a book on justice. It's just where I happened to be in the catalog of what I was working on with the ministry stuff. And I just kept writing. I wasn't distracted. I wasn't out of my head. I wasn't worried. I just kept rolling. What would it be like for you to have your whole professional life stolen from you, and it just doesn't even cause the slightest blip in your peace? Can you even imagine what that would be like? It's yours. It's on the menu. You can have it. The price has been paid. All you have to do is choose it. What would it be like to watch your life savings fluctuate by the price of a house on a weekly basis or a daily basis, to go through that for months? And I know some people watching this might be in a situation where they are in charge of more than that. There's more volatility than that in their lives. It's totally possible. But for most people, that'd leave you with even less hair than I have, right? In short order. What would it be like to be turned on by the people closest to you in your life? To be bitterly disappointed in folks whose job it is, who have every reason in the world to be at least decent to you, and who do the most horrific things and lie about you and steal from you and cheat you? What would it be like to just have overwhelming peace through all of that? Can you even imagine? But here's another one, coming back to what Moses said to the Lord about the Israelites and what the nations would think, and mixing this in with some of the other things that I have said. What would it be like to live your life in such consummate dedication to God and in such an open way, a public way, that God's reputation would be tied to your well-being? Think about that. I've publicly proclaimed that I have repented of my sins, and that these things that have happened to me have happened because I've lived the gospel. It's because I have followed the things that the Lord has told me to do. I've spent, I got up at 11:30 last night. It's 8:38 a.m. I've been working that whole time in ministry stuff. And that's early even for me, but it's not some, once-off thing. This isn't irregular. My average is about 3 a.m. right now. And I do this 10 plus hours a day, 7 days a week. And I'm public about it. Whose responsibility is my well-being? Do you think the Lord's promises are true? Because I know they're true. Now, for the last while, I have asked you all to consider creating a monthly recurring donation up to the value that you find in this ministry and these materials I create, the books, the videos, the blogs, the talks. I give it all away for free. And I have for, I think we're approaching 15 years now. But forgive me if I'm wrong in that. I'm quite tired. And in a video that I published a while back, I very carefully laid out the case for this request. And I've asked you to donate as much as you find, to donate the value that you have found in these things up to the point that it would not displace something more important in your life. Very few people have taken up that invitation. Some of those people have been enormously generous, and all of them have given something, and I very much appreciate it because I know that money is valuable. I continue to be in a place where those recurring donations are much less than the smallest I can get my monthly budget for my family. Now, I told you we have lived frugally, much more frugally than we needed to for years. Like I said, I was able to pay off my house, ended up getting a cash out refinance for that, investing the money. I lost almost all of it, but since then we have continued to be even more frugal. When I got canceled, I still had the university, the company. That was brutal. I'll spare you the details, but I basically had to recode an enormous multi-year project that was worked on by a sizable team, basically by myself, and find and prepare a small team of people to help me with that over time. In addition to that, at the same time as all of that. And I was able to nurse that company along for 3 years, but it closed up several months ago. And so all of that time, we were extra frugal in trying to prepare for what was the eventuality that would also go south. And that I'd have this opportunity to do full-time ministry after all, but in a very different way than I had intended. So I'd intended to self-finance this, and now the only way to do it is through donations. Anyway, so the point we're at now is that the shortfall that has been occurring monthly, I've been financing that out of our savings. And that savings is a cash out mortgage, right? So I'm debt financing our living expenses. And the donations have been something I'm very grateful for. But I'm trying to say in the plainest way possible that if you're on the fence and you're thinking about donating, I ask you to do so, up to the value you have found and up to the point where it doesn't displace anything more important in your life. And I'm not necessarily requesting those who already donate to donate more, although that's your business. There are many people who watch these videos, many more people who find value in them than who donate. And I ask you to seriously consider changing that. As it stands, I'm going to have to make some radical shifts in how we do things that might include selling our house and moving cross country somewhere. Now, as you know, I believe that there is a strategic advantage to living where I'm living in many ways. I've made videos about that. I'm not sure how many of them have been published. But I've talked about this in the sense of trying to help other people have more information about where they should move. But, the interesting thing is that we bought this house at such a time and got such a deal on it that selling it and moving elsewhere is not going to save any money in almost any case. And so, but I am looking cross country to find something ridiculously cheap. Because it would have to be to make a difference in that regard. And there are some other extreme things I'm looking at too that are significant deviations from the way that we do things right now to make that work. The message is we can continue to do this from month to month, but we're debt financing it. And that's not something I can keep doing forever. And so a change has to happen. And so in as much as you find value in these things, if you're not donating and you chose to, that would help close that gap. Some of the other extreme things we're looking at is going on welfare. So going on food stamps would make an enormous difference in our budget. Food's the second most expensive thing after our mortgage. And so that's down about as cheap as we can get it. During the time where between getting canceled and shutting down the company, we worked like maniacs trying to pull bunches of rocks out of the field. We got a sweet deal on a pair of heifers. We started breeding pigs, etc., to try to offset that food bill. And we've had a lot of success in lowering it, but it's still substantial. I've got teenage boys. We're 7 people in this house. We eat a lot of food. So anyway, I think I've made my points here. I'm going to keep prodding with inviting for donations. It won't be this overt. But the larger picture here, zooming back out to what's even more important, and I guess still related to this, but this video is about giving a preview on this idea of being a servant to the Lord. And it's definitely better than anything else you could do. That let me just dwell on that a little more, because it's so important to ruminate on our gratitude. Like I said, I have made tremendous sacrifices across my adult life to be in a place where this has been the desire of my heart. My whole adult life, all I wanted to do was preach the gospel and help people through preaching the gospel, right? Through coaching, through helping people be and do better than they otherwise would be or do. And I had my plan for how that was going to happen. And the Lord had another plan. His plan's always better. But every day I get up and hopefully I said it with a smile on my face. I get to do this 70 hours a week. There are people who work that much a week on something they don't care about. But I get to give it directly to God. I wouldn't have it any other way. I have a lot of health problems, and a lot of times those are what wake me up in the night. But I could stay there if I wanted to. I could just lay in my bed. I could be a comatose zombie all day. The jury's out on how comatose or zombie-like I am. But I'm writing, and I'm making videos, and I'm doing these things. And it's because I love the Lord. I can't wait to get out of bed, even at 11:30 at night. I wake up, I say, let's do this. I look at the clock, and I'm like, this would be easier if it was 3:30 in the morning instead of midnight or 11:30 or 10 or 1. Let's do this. That's extra hours. I'll make it work somehow, So there's no place I'd rather be. And even if we sell this house and we move somewhere else, and I've got to help my wife not be upset about having a lot less space because she homeschools, and that's easier when we have a place to do it, and the kids are less crazy, and we have stuff to manage with all of that, but so be it. And that's the thing. It's like when you really give yourself to the Lord completely, He's going to lead you through some stuff. I will warn you of that. I will talk about it at much greater length at some other time, but you can read the book of Job. I've told you here about some of the stuff that can happen. You see stuff happen to other people. All of it can happen to you too. You know, the gospel is meant to give us a way to endure and overcome all things. It's not just about going through life and hoping that the flames don't hit you, right? But the benefit of doing that is that the flames can't burn you anymore. You have something that nothing else can take away. My happiness is not my house. It's not my little farm. Even though we put in so much work, and it fills me with joy to just walk down my driveway and to see all these trees we planted and they're getting bigger. I love my family. The Lord could take away my family, and it still would not take away my trust in him. I'd be really sad, but I'd be okay. Because he makes everything okay. You can't get to this level of trust in him without really living for him and really trusting him and letting him take you through this stuff and teach you. So we have the opportunity. We get to do it. We get to serve him. And you have the opportunity to participate in what I do through donating. And you have a bunch of other opportunities to serve the Lord in your life, in whatever way is particular to you. There's nothing better that you can do. And maybe that service is going to your fairly normal job every day and busting it out. And that's great. And if it is, you should feel all these blessings in doing it. You should receive all these blessings in doing it. Maybe your service to God is changing diapers on little kids all day and doing an endless amount of laundry. You'll receive all these blessings if it's for that purpose, if it's for the Lord's purpose. It's not about what you do, it's about why you do it. This is my path, and your path will look different. But the blessings and the conditions, they're the same. So I pray that God blesses you as you walk that path. And I hope something I've said in this video has been helpful to you in your relationship with the Lord. Thanks for watching.